Hey, it's Squidly. So in the last couple of years, I have started using exclusively one-person tents. Why am I doing that? Let me just say that I live in central Alabama and we're in the middle of a heat wave, which means it is stupid hot and humid outside. And I was going to set these tents up and shoot my video out there, but no, it's just too hot. I was out there for about 30 seconds and had a whole river of water flowing down. So I've decided to film this inside and just put some pictures and video. I'll put it all down here and you can see what I'm talking about kind of as I go along. So in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been using 3 one-person tents. The Gear Top one-person, the Hike and Bike Zion one-person, and the Z-Packs Plexamid. And just for some context, the Z-Packs Plexamid is the old version of the Z-Packs Plex Solo. In addition to those 3 tents, I also own a bivy that I haven't used in 20 years. In fact, I don't even know why I still have it, but I just can't bring myself to throw it away. But I have it. I have no pictures of it. I have no video of it because I was using this before the invention of the camera, I guess. Okay, so all of that to ask the question, is a one-person tent for you? And the only way to determine that would be to go through the pros and cons, which I'm going to do here, and then sort of determine, do the pros outweigh the cons or do the cons outweigh the pros, and what do you want to do? So with that in mind, let's get started. We'll start with the pros first. For me, one of the biggest pros of carrying a one-person tent is the comparative size of it as it's packed up in my backpack. In particular, the Z-Packs Plexamid and the Gear Top one-person take up very little space in my pack. Really like those tents for those reasons. The second pro, as you might expect, is that one-person tents are lighter than two-person tents. A lot of companies will offer a one-person and a two-person, some of them even a three-person tent of the same variety, the same name, just a scaled-down version of it that they tout as a one-person tent. Of course, that one-person tent with less fabric, maybe fewer poles, less material that goes into making it, is going to be a lighter weight tent. And having a lighter weight tent is one of the reasons that pushed me to start using a one-person tent. And finally, the third pro, and really this is the pro that sent me kind of over the edge away from a two-person tent to a one-person tent, is the size of the footprint. When you get to a campsite and you're looking for a place to pitch your tent, sometimes there's no place that will accommodate a two-person tent, or your options are very limited. With a one-person tent having a much smaller footprint, you have more options about where to put it, how to orient it, and there are, of course, other considerations like what's up above your head with Widowmakers, being able to put that in a place where you don't run the risk of dying from falling limbs and trees. The last two-person tent that I had was the Gossamer Gear the 2, and in camp one night, here's what I had to say about it. Oh, and I was going to set up my tent, but at this shelter there was nowhere that would I could set up a two-person tent, let alone my Gossamer Gear the 2, which has a pretty big footprint. There's just nowhere that I could put it that it would accommodate it. And I tried one time. Now let's take a look at the cons. And honestly, these are the things that may make you say a one-person tent is pretty emphatically not for me. And that's okay. Not everyone has to agree on these things. So con number 1 is the minimal living space and space to bring gear in with you. And of course, every one-person tent is a little bit different, but of my 3 tents, the Gear Top has the least amount of space. There is so little room in there for, having a little bit of elbow room, and certainly not enough room to bring a whole lot of gear. The Hike and Bike has a little bit more elbow room. There's a little bit more room to spread out, but still not a whole lot of room to bring in a lot of gear. And I have, in the rain before, brought in nearly all my gear, but it was a really tight fit. And finally, the Z-Packs Plexamid is not a perfect rectangle. It's got a different shape, and so there's kind of a cutout that kind of sticks out, that gives you a little bit more room for some of your gear. And for that reason, I really like that one-person tent. Along the lines of the limited living space, I made kind of a joke video about packing up in a one-person tent, and I'll link that up here for you. Just kind of a joke. It was just intended to be tongue-in-cheek and to be funny and silly, which is kind of just what I do sometimes. The second con kind of goes with that limited living space, and it is that if there's inclement weather and you're sort of stuck in your tent, you're just kind of confined there, or get out and be exposed to whatever terrible weather conditions there are, it can sometimes be uncomfortable. Right now, I'm playing for you just a short clip of a trip when I was in Colorado, and we had just gotten set up with our tents, and the bottom fell out, and it was raining and hailing basically for the rest of the afternoon and on into the evening. And this was when I was in my gear top, which again is that smallest of the three, and it was pretty tough being confined to that really small space for that length of time. In really cool temperatures, which honestly is about 3/4 of what I do, there can be condensation. And the smaller the space gets, the more condensation there can be, especially if you have a tent that doesn't have much in the way of airflow in it, which honestly most of them don't. And so with that extra condensation, now you run the risk of rubbing up against the sidewalls of the tent and getting that condensation on your sleeping bag, on your clothes, on you. And depending on the tent, that could be pretty severe. Just as an example, my Z-Packs Plexamid is a single wall tent, and so anything that you touch in there, you're going to have condensation all over whatever touches it. The double wall tents are a little bit better in that regard, especially that hike and bike Zion one person. For cold temperatures where I know there's going to be condensation, I really like that tent because there's a little bit more elbow room, and if I brush up against the mesh, I'm not going to get everything wet. On the other hand, there's the gear top, which is so tight and so close, and I'm basically at the limit of how big you can be. I'm about 5'10". If I brush up against anything, I probably am going to brush up against the mesh hard enough to push the mesh up against the rain fly that has all the condensation on it, and so I end up with now some of that condensation getting on my sleeping bag. So for me, those are the pros and cons of using a one-person tent. In my mind, the pros outweigh the cons, but the cons are real. In order to figure out whether a one-person tent is for you, you would have to weigh those pros and cons against each other for yourself and for your style of backpacking and what you want to do and what you find to be comfortable or acceptable. That's not something I can do for you. So do me a favor. In the comments, tell me what pros or cons did I miss, because I'm sure I missed some. Those are just the ones that came to my mind. Also tell me why you like using a one-person tent, or you have no intention of ever using a one-person tent. Either way is fine. And on the way out, don't forget to hit like and subscribe.